heard the term fluctuating disability? Because that's sort of what I'm here to talk about today, and particularly how it shows up for gamers. Hi, if you're new here, I'm Molly, also known as LittleMoTAC, and I am a disabled gamer. I have a condition called EDS, and I am very loud about it. Apologies. If you've never heard the term fluctuating disability before, also sometimes called dynamic disability among other similar terms, it basically refers to disabilities that, as you would assume, fluctuate. They can be quote-unquote worse and more disabling at some times, and less so at other times. This could be caused by or related to a bunch of things, like for a few examples, your menstrual cycle, the weather, recent levels of exertion, just to name a few, but that's not an exhaustive list. Disabilities can be affected by a whole load of things. Because of this sort of fluctuating nature, it can affect the way that disabled gamers play games at any one time. For example, it can affect the amount of time you spend playing a game in one sitting. It can affect being able to use a traditional controller versus an adaptable or accessible controller. It can change whether you can reach or hold down certain keys on a keyboard, whether you can sit upright versus laying down, seeing things on a screen. Because of this, options that allow you to customize the gameplay as much as possible during the gameplay, during your playthrough, are so useful for people with fluctuating or dynamic disabilities. Just to give a few examples, being able to remap controls so that you can use various buttons across your time playing. For instance, just for me, I have varying strength in my fingers on any given day. Sometimes I cannot use the analog stick on a controller, sometimes I can. Sometimes I cannot hold down the shift key on my keyboard, other days I can. So being able to remap controls depending on how I'm feeling that day is incredible. It can be really, really helpful if you have fluctuating strength or dexterity. Being able to change difficulty levels throughout your playthrough can be good for this, but also for varying levels of fatigue on any given day. On days where someone might strain their eyes too much, being able to turn something like high contrast mode on, or make the UI bigger, or make captions bigger can be really helpful. For games without voice acting, being able to choose the speed of scrolling text can be handy for days with bad brain fog or cognitive comprehension. We all know that the more accessibility options someone can add to their game, incredible, amazing, right? But that's sort of not what I'm talking about here, especially because the amount of accessibility options someone can add to a game varies hugely, from like a AAA developer to an indie developer based on like budget, number of people working on it. So that's sort of, we know more accessibility options is amazing, but I'm sort of talking about being able to change those options during gameplay. I can't remember what it was, but I remember the first game where I could change the difficulty options whilst playing was like mind-blowing to me, because some days I want a challenge, other days I can't do a challenge, I just want to just turn off for a little bit and just play through a wonderful story. And then other days I want to, play on hard mode and have really difficult combat. It all varies depending on how I'm feeling. And so being able to change that during the game and not just being like, okay, I'll start a whole new playthrough on easy, I'll start a whole new playthrough on hard or expert, was really nice. I could just play the game and I could just change up the difficulty depending on how I was feeling. Or like for another example, being able to customize your controls as you play based on what controller you're using that day or what position is comfortable for you to sit/lay in that day. Another example, being able to change the size of the UI or captions based on where you're playing. For instance, if you're sat on the couch playing on a TV, you might need a larger heads-up display or captions for that compared to like if you're sitting a foot away from a monitor at your desktop PC. Depends on how you're feeling that day. Oh, but I'm not disabled and I don't think I ever will be. That would be impossible. I hear you cry. Well, if you're still unconvinced that this is necessary, which I know that some portion of the internet are always not convinced that accessibility options or accessibility in any form is necessary. These sort of options can also be helpful for what are called situational disabilities, which are mostly not what people think of as like traditional disabilities, but can technically fall under the same terms as a fluctuating disability. As although they're not what people would traditionally think of as disability, they fluctuate. For example, having children in your home that need attending to at various times. Pause menus, manual saves, amazing. You can put the game down and walk away, help your kids, come back. I saw an example on Twitter the other day, having a pet, like a cat or a dog, laying in your lap, laying on your arm is going to restrict movement, because if they're sleeping on you, you can't move them. That's that's the rules. So if you've only got the use of one arm while your pet is laying on the other one, being able to remap your controls so you can play with one hand for that period of time is really, really handy. Even playing in an environment with varying sound levels where you sometimes can't fully hear the game audio means people can make use of captions, but also directional audio indicators that some games have. And a really cool example of this, the visual sound indicators, are the ones used in Fortnite. They were originally intended for mobile players who, sometimes if you're out and about, you can't use sound. And then if you're in your bedroom or using headphones, you can. So that was their original intention. But now they are actually going to be on by default across all platforms because they're just so helpful. And that's the thing, you can turn them off at any time. If you suddenly decide that you don't like them, you can turn them off. And that's the whole point, is that you can change those options during your gameplay. And that's the important thing, is being able to access these options throughout your playthrough. Options, yay! I feel like there are a small community of gamers who will never like the idea of accessibility within games, whether that be accessibility options or literally something like the visual sound indicators, which were not an accessibility option. They were there for players on a different platform from like console. And people always, and if they don't know that it's helpful for accessibility, love it. Yay, what a good idea. And then as soon as you say it could be for accessibility, suddenly it's bad again. So I just sort of wanted to point out that not every accessibility option needs to be purpose built for accessibility. So I think it's important to point out that options that are not necessarily intended for accessibility can still make stuff more accessible, like a pause menu. It's a pause menu, very simple, but it does make a game more accessible. So hopefully this video touched somewhat on how important options are for those with fluctuating disabilities and being able to control them during gameplay. I would like to one day do like a way more in-depth video than this, with like examples from games who've done it really well, or like examples where games could improve upon it, and maybe delving into some games where the communities are so like steadfast in their beliefs of what a game should be. Any option that could increase accessibility or make the game easier or more fun is bad, because games are not for enjoyment, actually. They are to suffer and to show your skill in your own home where no one will actually ever know. Again, I do want to make a more in-depth video about this. This video is very like off the cuff, based on just stuff I have been thinking about and stuff I've been seeing on social media recently. I just wanted to get my thoughts out, and then I can use it as like a jump pad for a more in-depth and more thoroughly thought out video in the future. So it was a quick and a short one, but thank you for watching. I hope you're having a lovely day, and feel free to follow me on the socials, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. I never know how to finish videos.